It's done doing this thing.
Okay, this is the Camden Harbor Committee on October 6th. And we're streaming on Zoom. So I assume everybody received a copy of the agenda yesterday. Sorry for the short notice, but meeting kind of crept up on us pretty quick. So with that said, I guess the first item on the agenda is the points from the letter from Audra. Give me just a minute to pull that up.
Mark,
Jeremy, yes.
I saw later on in the agenda, I have another Zoom meeting I need to attend to at like at 9 or so. And
Yeah,
I saw,
okay, let's skip right to the Army Corps then.
okay, I appreciate it. Army Corps, unfortunately couldn't make this meeting, but they said they will do the next Zoom meeting with the Harbor Committee, and they'll plan for that. And that's to discuss, that would be Adam Burnett and folks down at the Army Corps office in Boston to review the breakwater proposal that they've have on their work plan for many, many, many years. And this will be a kind of a good initial discussion with them. So that will be, go ahead.
Did you discuss a date with them?
I did not. So he just could not do today. So he said, let me know when the Harbor Committee meets next. And if you could, I can find that out later if you guys want to decide that, and then I can get that to him later on today.
Do we want to look at our calendars and pick a day? Should we get back on our normal monthly meetings, the first Tuesday of every month?
It's election day.
Right? You tied up on election day?
Yes, I am.
You are? So 10th? Well, agreed. Next meeting will be November 10th, 8:30 in the morning.
I will reach out to Adam today.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Yep.
Okay. So, town manager's letter. The first item on that agenda was day sailors. With that, I received a letter yesterday. Give me just a minute to pull that up, which I'll read to the committee. Okay, this letter was addressed to Audra, town manager. Hi, Audra. I hope you have been happy and well during these uncertain times. I had a question regarding the day sailor permits, but first a little background. I am very familiar with Camden's day sailor business as I ran one for the schooners there full-time 2 years ago. I am aware that there are 7 day sailor permits and that apparently they are all being used. I know that there is now a new ordinance that permits are 3 years in length as well. My question is this: the OLAD, Owl, Heritage, LazyJack, Lively Lady, 2, and Surprise all use the dock. with the 7th permit, I believe belonging to Ray Williamson, who never uses it. What are the provisions for a new applicant to apply for a permit? I see that they are taking applications and fees, but is there any use to apply? When the 3 years are up and everyone re-ups, it seems somewhat depressing that people are blocking new blood and enthusiastic business owners from entering the harbor. For example, Lazy Jack Business before COVID barely ran at 60% capacity. An unmanned booth and a boat that was the last one to start running and the first one to put up in the fall. Nothing against them, but if there are people who want to come in, who understand the logistics of the harbor and want to offer cruises and do it well, it seems like there is just no room for them. I'm guessing where that leaves someone like me, keen on starting a new business and inquisitive about the process to do so in Camden. So, any thoughts on that?
Who's the letter from?
It's been blocked out.
Oh.
Which I'm assuming that's the case because this is, it should be a matter not decided on who it is, but the process and how the waterfront operates.
Mr. Chairman, I recall in our deliberations about the day sailor agreements, we talked about operators not using the using their license. And I think that we ended up that we didn't want to put in a use it or lose it clause in the agreement itself, but leave that up to the select board as part of the annual review to make any decisions regarding use it or lose it. Does anyone concur with that? Do I recall that correctly?
Yes, there was something on that, and I tried to find that this morning. I've got just the drafts, and I haven't actually pulled up the final copy. Of how that was worded, but you're correct, and I do know that each license agreement is subject to an annual review of how they performed and whether they've lived up to their agreements. What complicates this is the select board has made special arrangements with the day sailors, and I don't know what they were, and the harbor committee was certainly not involved or had any part of the special conditions. So
Mark,
yes.
can you just expand? What do you mean by the special arrangements that the select board made with the day sailor? What is, can you just go?
Well, apparently, I mean, some boats were granted an exception to not run because of COVID, and other boats were not required to make their payments. And that's about the extent of what I know. Maybe Steve can fill us in more on that.
Well, I do know that there was definitely a discussion, and we can look in the notes about the fact that one of the applicants, Sally, was not using the actual permit. I mean, they would use it very rarely, and I'm sure we can get a comment from Ray, but I think last year there was something said that, okay, well, basically you have to, are you going to use it? And I believe that Ray said, yes, I am. And at that point, the select board said, okay, well, if you're going to use it, that's fine. When now we run into the fact that we're in a pandemic right now and a lot of businesses didn't open and we're losing businesses. So that's going to be a point of discussion on whether or not, this committee, wants to talk about that. And I would imagine that you're going to want to talk about the fact that for the first time, I think in history, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for the first time in Camden Harbor, we have more applicants that want to run off the day sale float than the select board is allowed to accept. So now we're going to have to discuss how the select board goes about doing that and how this committee advises the select board. Because last night I read some things in the waterways ordinance, and I'm actually reading it right now as I listen to you guys speak. On page 17 and page 18 of the ordinance, it talks about commercial passenger float and berthing slips. So that's, I think it's the only place in this piece of literature that talks about or guides you folks on how you're going to handle this. So, Mr. Chairperson, if you want, I can keep going. It talks about.
I agree with you there. I mean, this is the part of the ordinance that addresses how we handle that, but the license agreements also regulate how we handle it. Not just the ordinance.
Well, yeah. Well, so basically, you've got two things you want to discuss. One is the current permit holder, Sally. How are you going to deal with the fact that he was asked, to go ahead and use that? Ray said he was going to, and if it was a normal year, I could say it'd be cut and dry. If we weren't in a global pandemic, and Ray didn't use it again, then that would have been the death knell for that, I would imagine. But I would think that you at least have to discuss the fact that, okay, well, Ray for some reason wanted to run the Sally. It's a great little boat, but he didn't run for 18 and 19, and then he was supposed to run it for this year, and he didn't. But that's something where you guys will need to discuss. Like, okay, well, it was a pandemic. That being said, if you've got Sally and you've got now three other applicants that want that spot. So now you might have to look at all the boats and say, well, we have to rethink on how we do this.
Yeah, Bob, you're on mute. You're on mute, Bob.
You unmute him?
Can you hear me now?
Hear you now, yes.
Okay, good. So I don't think we need to or should or can reinvent the wheel. I do remember this discussion. I don't particularly remember how the language was, but I think that we went away from recommending that if you don't use it for X days or whatever, that you're out. That was more part of the review process, and we might have had some language that covered that, but it seems to me that the selectmen board did come up with final language and agreements, and that's what guides the process. And I think that means that at the end of this season, we go through the review process to see if there's any reason why a permit holder flunks out, which would open a space. But we had the whole discussion and debate about that you don't want to make this a every year flip of the coin, see who gets the permits, that there's investments involved in order to keep the industry going, but that there was a process for reviewing so that if people were not doing what they were meant to do, they don't just get to sit there for another 2 years, sort of holding water. And that being said, that was all done when we thought it was a normal year and a normal life. So I think the review process for what people did this summer, I don't know if our regulations specifically had it, but I also remember that there were things like Steve would be giving heads up that, hey, you haven't been doing this, you haven't been doing that, give people an opportunity to correct. When they don't correct them at the annual review, they get the boom lowered. So I just think we need to go back to what the license documents approved by the select board actually read. And then if we're involved in that review process, then we apply it as that. And as I just said, the obvious wrinkle is that when we thought about the review process, it wasn't involving the public health problem we've got now. And that may affect how heavy-handed people are about, well, you didn't do in 2020 what you should have been doing in 19, so we're going to flunk you out. But I think that we've been here. We don't need to invent a whole matrix again, because these people signed agreements that went as per whatever they read. So we really need to go back to those documents. Thanks.
Very good point, Bob. I agree with you. And you know, maybe the proper course of action here is to use our next meeting as a review process for the agreements and determine who's in line and who isn't in line. And I think that would be mostly a report from the harbor master and the harbor clerk on how things have proceeded this year.
I think it might be two stages, that exactly what you said the next time, with Steve really going boat by boat report card. And then if there's anyone that's getting a glitch or someone else is saying, well, boat X really shouldn't be getting such a good score because blah, 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 then maybe at the next meeting following that, you know, it would be time to make recommendations that people are in compliance or not in compliance. But I think it's important that both the license holders and the public be given a chance to respond to whatever Steve's appraisal is.
I agree. Josh.
One thing I would say is we do need to obviously recognize that we are in an extraordinary year. So I would also ask, as part of that sort of information gathering, that we find out what communication, if any, the license holders have had with the town. So did, you know, each vessel, whether it's the Lazy Jack or the Sally, inform the town, you know, ahead of time that no, due to the pandemic, they would not be running this year. And the same thing will, of course, happen with the Windjammers as well. We know that the Windjammers didn't run, but, you know, just what communication has happened between those license holders and the town.
Exactly. And that should be a report from Liz of their communication. The other thing is the select board has had meetings with the Windjammers and made agreements. So we need to research that and find out what that was all about.
Could we also
Select board member attending today.
of the current day sailor agreements that were actually approved, not all the different drafts that floated through us, but what the select board actually came up with?
Yes. What I'll do, Bob, is I will get a copy of the final agreements and email them to all the members.
Thank you.
Let me just write that down.
And I would say that, as part of that research, we all ought to familiarize ourselves with I guess page 19 of the ordinance that does specifically lay out the provisions for all applicants in terms of their review. It's spelled out pretty clear, the current uses, and it does say preference will be given to existing permit holders. So, this letter writer does make some allegations here and raises some questions. And most of those are answered in the harbor ordinance on page 19. It seems.
Josh, on page 19, what are you referring to? What paragraph?
It's the second full paragraph. The harbor committee will make recommendations about day sail licenses and windjammer berths based
Got
on
it.
characteristics of the vessels, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, well, I guess it's the select board. In reviewing and acting upon any application for lease or rental agreement, the select board may, among other things, consider, and then, the current uses, users and uses of the facility, size of the vessel, number of passengers, availability and effect on schedule, availability of a need for public utilities, access to the facility by the vessel. And then it says the select board may consider the harbor committee recommendations for permits. Which it just reinforces that we are an advisory committee.
Okay, so to sum that up, our next meeting will be a review of the, I guess, all commercial vessels. And
Mark, do you mean to say that you want to bring in a review of the windjammers? Because
Well-
they didn't run this year,
I know they didn't run, but
except for one,
I believe their agreement requires an annual review also. So, basically, Jeremy, are you signaling to us?
No, he's talking to me.
Oh, okay. The windjammer agreements require an annual review also.
Yeah,
So,
that should be pretty short.
yeah, it should be pretty short. They just didn't run, period.
Documented.
Just so it's on the record that we've reviewed them.
Yeah, well, we did have one windjammer that ran.
Right, and I think that makes it relevant, Steve. I think that's why, because it's not the whole fleet.
Right. Mistress.
Okay.
Good.
Next item was structure on a float. I think we resolved that at the last meeting, but just to formalize it. And I had it written down here somewhere.
Yeah, I've had a discussion with the gentleman who asked about that, had a letter into me, and I told him that at the meeting, I showed him that it's pretty cut and dry. It says, you can't really look at it any other way. It's
Right.
not allowed to have a structure on a float. Be permitted somewhere in Camden. There is someone who comes in for like 2 months in the winter, and it's a commercial fisherman, and they borrow a float, but they're not permitted. Commercial fishermen, you guys have probably seen it in there. It's usually right next to Wayfair, and they must winter there. They know that the other person who owns that float hasn't been an issue. But again, it's not permitted for that float.
Yeah. So to sum that up, it's on page 24 of the ordinance. Section H, paragraph 2, it says no building or structure shall be permitted on the floats. So that's for the record. Next thing is dinghy storage review. So I meant to get down to Lake Beach to look at that, but I just haven't. Sorry about that.
Well, you know, what was interesting this year was main storage facility, which is just north of the finger floats, you know, where the waterfalls are. That was, as far as my records, that was as full as it has ever been. In 2009, my records show that that was the only time that we had that type of volume. Basically didn't have any more spaces left. Now Steamboat Landing was pretty full, but not as full as I had seen it. And you know, because it was a pandemic and it was a little different, the use, the area right in front of the harbor master office, you know, the turnover spots and all that, that was more packed than ever, or as packed as it's ever been. The new area over at Lake Beach was brand new, and we had 4 boats, and then we had 8 boats. So we actually ended up with 7 or 8 boats, kayaks, very small boats over there. So I think we need to talk about maybe taking that area at Lake Beach and trying to enhance that, make it a little easier for folks to get boats off and on that little granite slide, that little ledge, to bring it to the beach, to the storage area. And talk about any other ideas. If anyone's got any other ideas or places we can store dinghies, it would merit talking about it, because we are running out of space.
Well, I think our discussion was sort of twofold. One would be, do we have places to put things? But then the second, or maybe the first question is, what is a dinghy? You know, in this current world, because you do see things that are, I do know, I happen to be out in North Haven now, and that not at the town, but at the yacht club dock, there's a dock for rowboats. There's a dock for small motorboats. And then there are moorings for larger motorboats, and they're sort of broken out that way. And what I see in Camden is that I'm not sure that we have, I mean, I would have thought 25, 30 years ago that a dinghy was a rowboat. But obviously the world has changed. And I think that it may be that we're talking about the ordinance more than anything, but you know, when you apply for a quote dinghy permit, what is it that qualifies as a dinghy, and does it really make sense in terms of when we get crowded storage to have some of the boats that are sitting there now be thought of as dinghies?
We've had this discussion before. The old or prior harbor committee discussed this at length for a couple meetings, because it is not a new issue. One of the things that was brought up was just that, Bob, was like part of the committee said, shouldn't we pretty much make it so only folks that have mooring permits and have a boat that's moored be allowed, or give preference to have a dinghy to get to their boat? That was discussed, and then someone else brought up, why should we make it so people that can afford a bigger boat, the folks that can't afford that or don't want one, why are we denying them access to the bay by having a small boat that they can go enjoy Curtis Island on? So it becomes a pretty hot topic, and it becomes a part of almost an ideology of what we think we should be, you know, managing. So yeah, you guys want to have that discussion, let's have it. If not, we need to discuss, Bob, you brought up another good point. Should we be delineating certain areas for certain types of boats? And would that help with the management? Would you be able to get more certain style boats if they have the same characteristics, you know, with gunnels? Would you be able to fit more in? I don't know. Can't see how, but maybe.
I hadn't thought of it so much, but it does make sense to me as a rower that if you're trying to get to the outer harbor by a rowboat, then you want to be at Steamboat Landing. I've done both. And used to find when I rode out from the public landing area, I was already pooped by the time I got to Steamboat Landing. But you could designate areas where motorboats that obviously can get long distance faster would be farther from the mooring area than rowboats. I don't know if that really makes a difference ultimately, because you're still trying to get the same number of craft into different spots, and they still may be overcrowded. And obviously, anyone who's listened to me pontificate that my concern is that just particularly Steamboat Landing, you look on any given day in July and August, and the boats are like a jigsaw puzzle, and it just doesn't make any sense. And is there a way to organize it so that it looks like ye old classic boats tied up to the float with their bows aimed the right direction look? But thanks.
Okay, how about expansion of dinghy capacity?
Yeah, I'm all ears. I'm all ears. We had a great idea about possibly putting a new dock or new float next to the head of the harbor where the library park is, but I heard that was not met with much ovation by the library park.
What about is it possible, I know we've only got a limited number of posts in there now, but could the Steamboat Landing float system go out by 1, 2, or 3 more links?
But we'll have to get Ben Ellison back here. And that was his dream. Ben Ellison always wanted to put an L off that and kind of facing west, an L facing west, make it so you had more room for dinghies. We even, I think at one point, tried to get a grant for that, but we weren't successful.
I was thinking more just in a straight line going out. But I haven't been down there, what day it was, Wednesday or whatever day it was blowing, and trying to walk out there to see how my dinghy was doing. It was hard to stay straight up with the rock and roll. And so that's why I say, is it feasible to go straight out, or do you have, at some point, there's too much action on things that are linked in a straight line?
Well, there's no doubt that was the maximum that you could leave those floats, and I was about to take them out, and it stayed suddenly longer than it was forecasted. So there was quite a bit. Remember, those floats, gentlemen, are 19. They just served our 19th year of service to the town. So they're getting up there. I've rebuilt 3 of them twice now. The ones that are the first 3 always take a beating. They've held up very well, but it's not going to be long.
Well, I was more concerned with just, engineering wise, whether it's essentially safe to put, just like you've got, but if we added 1, 2, or 3 more out there, do they become unmanageable in general? Or did we put those many because someone just drew it on a piece of paper and put it in a grant, but it wasn't really designed on how far you could go without having it go nuts?
Well, remember, that wasn't designed as a dinghy storage area. It was designed as a boat launch, place to put your boat. And so the nice thing is that on the other side, we're allowed to put, it makes sense to put dinghies there, and it's worked out. And for folks that have boats in Sherman's Cove, that's their desired place to put their dinghies. That's why I think it's so popular. But whether or not we should put more floats on for that's a different discussion. I would think not, personally.
So, Steve, what if we ran another line of floats on the other side of the boat launch? So you had floats on both sides of the boat ramp going out.
I think it could be tricky accessing. When I come in to get to the ramp side of those existing floats and do a U-turn, and it's just in a 19-foot Mako, which has a pretty tight radius, I'm still swinging beyond the north side of the ramp area in order to come up. And so if you have ramps coming out there and you were trying to sort of do a circle so your bow could face out into the waves, it'd be kind of tight.
Yeah, we really need Lyman Morris to build their new marina and their breakwater so we could solve our issues and put more boats there. Josh, why don't you get going on that?
Yes, sir. I wanted to just, back to the dinghy discussion, you know, it does say in the ordinance that dinghies are defined as 14 feet overall. And I wanted to just see if, did you have any sense, Steve, this year? It seemed like the dinghies were bigger this year to me, walking down that dinghy dock. A lot of whaler or whaler-esque boats. And you know what, this year, I think it was incredible and awesome that people were out on the water as much as they were. So I think if there was ever a year to kind of push the limits, that's it. But in terms of management, that troubled me. You know, I thought, are these boats pushing the limit? So do you guys actually check them, or how does that work?
Well, once again, not a new discussion by any means. And we can have it again. I usually go with how I enforce things by the tone that this committee sets. And one of the things we talked about, and I don't know how many years ago, was if a vessel is 2 inches longer than 14 feet, but it's very thin, like say a canoe, then it's really not, and if it's tied the right way, you can fit 2 or 3 canoes next to one wide vessel. So it's kind of like, you know, it starts to come down to someone pays the money for the permit, they put the boat down there, and you see someone using it every day or every other day. They're getting a good use of our asset. Then you get some boats where people put it in and they don't use it at all. It's kind of a waste of space. Obviously, that's going to irk some people. It irks me a little bit. Yes, Jimmy and I have talked about if you have a whaler that has over 20 horsepower, or we can discuss what we think is something that makes it so it's not a dinghy at all, but a small boat that can get you out. Maybe we should have a new designation for that. Maybe we should charge more for that. I don't know. That's worth talking about. All these little things can add up to, you know, managing dinghies, pricing, maybe different characteristics of boat, and so maybe charge differently. I don't know.
I'm not so much into the charging part, but I think that first thing I'd look at is the length, because I own a 13-foot whaler and I don't think it's a dinghy. And I think that we might think about making a dinghy 12 feet and then dealing with length, or maybe there's some special wording for a canoe, but having a width and length requirement to a dinghy would take care of a lot of these things. I really don't know why 14 feet was thought of as a dinghy, and whether they were really thinking about boats that are used to access other boats, or whether they were, I know there used to be in the inner harbor, maybe there still is, a North Haven quotes dinghy, but it's like 15 feet long. It's a sailboat, the real sailboat. So I just think at some point we need to, and I'm sure this is in the ordinance and therefore needs a lot more reviews than us, but we should think about recommending some sort of revision to the actual definition of a dinghy. Because I get Steve's enforcement sort of philosophy that you have a certain amount of discretion is the better part of valor, but we also need to just have rules that make sense to what we're trying to do. Because like I say, I think there are perfectly legitimate boats that all need to access the water, but they're not necessarily the same thing, and that we should think about dinghies, small power boats, etc., and where they should be put, and not just treat them all as if they're the same thing.
Another idea, Mr. Chairperson, since we're talking the last two subjects, day sailors and dinghies, just brings up in my mind that 2 years ago, there was a design that was proposed and it's in my office, and we talked about it, which would change the existing day sailor float from a very large, I think she's 15 feet wide. We would separate it to two thin docks that were slanted. Now instead of having two berths, you would have four berths. You could have four boats in at any time. Day sailors picking up people. We could change that and make it so we made that to three berths, and then the most northern stretch, which is right next to where all the dinghies are anyway, we could just wrap that around, tie it in so you could have more dinghy space. So that we're in the process, Mr. Chairperson, in the next 2-3 years of redoing the harbor. That might merit talking about, you know, a radical change like that for the future. I don't know. So I had to bring that up.
So that ramp that the day sailors use would no longer be just a day sailor ramp and float. That would be public access for dinghies.
Correct. And instead of the ramp going out from the actual wharf and facing in an easterly direction, it would be closer to my office and it would be parallel with the wharf. So it would go down in a southerly direction. You'd get on and you'd walk down, and then you'd be on a much longer float. So all those dinghies that are turned upside down just in front of my float, that dock would be extended, and the ramp would actually go parallel with the granite wall down, up and down on that thing. And so instead of the ramp going out and you're landing 20 feet out when you get off the ramp, the aluminum ramp, you'd be touching the granite wall as you go down.
So is that a design that's hanging on your wall?
Correct.
It is.
Correct. And I think if we change that a little bit, and so instead of having four berths, we use one of the berths instead of for day sailors, it's all for dinghies now. So now we've increased the dinghy storage by about probably 16 boats, maybe more. And we have one more berth for day sailors. It's worth talking about, worth looking at.
Yeah.
Because if we do that, then we don't have to shorten the 86-foot long one 18 feet, because you're not going to be bringing a day sailor in that northern slip. You'll just be taking small dinghies in and out. You have a bigger area for dinghies.
So another concept that I think I mentioned before was the back float there, where you do the transient slips for the big boats.
Yeah.
If we took, say, from the breakwall out, say, pick a number, 40 feet, and turn that into a dinghy dockage, then that solves a couple of problems. It solves the concerns we have about larger boats tying up in there. And it also gives us a little more dinghy dockage. Any thoughts on that concept? No thoughts?
I think exploring
Well,
any ways that we can increase, we obviously have a need for increased dinghy dockage if we're at capacity. So I think exploring any options to increase that is great, whether it's along that backside dock or elsewhere.
The suggestion that Mark just had, that does reduce the revenue the town gets from the boats coming in there.
Yeah, and another idea is one of the fishermen talked to me a week ago and said that they would love it if we got a new fisherman hoist over at Steamboat Landing and moved them all out to Steamboat Landing. And so now the commercial fishermen whom we might think like to get, you know, tourists to look at them, they really don't want that. So that's another idea, is to move the 4 or 5 active fishing fleet over to Steamboat Landing, and now that area that is commercial fishing could all be for dinghy storage. There's another
Well-
option.
So you're talking about a dock at Steamboat for the fishermen?
Yes, it could be on the other side of the pilings, and that could be for fishermen to come and with their catch.
When you say on the other side of the pilings, so you're wiping out the dinghy storage and Steamboat Landing?
Well, no, I think you'd be able to, you know, we could talk about it. We could either talk about making it on the end, we have an L for fishermen, or, you know, we'd have to think it out. But this is coming from the fishermen, not from me.
Where would the boom be located? Where would the hoist be located?
That's something we'll have to talk about. I don't know off the hand.
I'd like to take it back to Bob's comment regarding a definition of a dinghy. I've said it before, so I'll reiterate that kayaks and canoes, I think, just by the design, were intended to be transported, used, and then reloaded and taken home. And I'm concerned about the creep effect that's going to happen at Lates Beach. You've got a foothold there. It's not really very usable because of the stones that people are having to get up and down. And you're implying that you would like to see a ramp constructed there or a set of stone steps. There's already a set of stone steps that allows access for people who go to enjoy the park to be able to get down on the beach. It looks to me like putting the kayaks there, people have avoided trying to climb up over the stones, and they're using the adjacent property owner. And there's a path worn on the adjacent property, and there's a sign up that's declaring that as private property. So we've already overstepped our bounds there. I'm also concerned, Steve, that the rebar that you use to anchor the ends of the chain is a liability. I understand you've painted it yellow and you've tied an orange flag on it, on both of them, but that doesn't make it so they're not a liability. If some kid falls on, or even a grown-up falls on one of those pieces of rebar, in a construction site, rebar is not allowed to be exposed. If you leave rebar sticking up with nothing on the top of it, OSHA will cite you. It's going to cost you a lot of money. So that, I think, needs to be removed ASAP. The liability there is just, and it's non-compliant. It's simply non-compliant. And
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, we can
it
I'll take a look at that today.
It comes back to the definition of what's a dinghy. And are we under any obligation to provide space to anybody for a kayak or a canoe? Something that, you know, was intended to be lifted by one person and placed on either in the back of a pickup truck or on the roof of a vehicle. I mean, there's a lot of vehicles driving around that have kayak racks on the top of them. So why is it that people are being allowed to, and maybe those kayaks aren't being used to access? I think Bob has a good point that I think that dinghy space is something that's provided for people to access their boats that are in the outer harbor. And yes, you run into a problem where some people, that's all they want is a dinghy. They row in their dinghy. Another observation I've made is that you're not going to keep any kind of a quality boat at any of the facilities that the town has. I wouldn't take my Lapstrake Peapod down, and I don't take it down and tie it up to either Steamboat Landing or the Inner Harbor, and because it'll get destroyed. Somebody will bring in an aluminum boat and tie up next to it, and the gunnels will be chafed off within 24 hours. So, you know, we're not, and so consequently, we end up with a lot of pretty much junk boats tied up because nobody in their right mind is going to put a decent boat down there because it'll get destroyed.
But I put a decent boat down there and now it's a junk boat, so I fit right in.
Well, but that's my point. That's my point. Put a decent boat down there and within a short period of time, it's going to be junk. You know, the Steamboat Landing is so exposed and there's so often, well, even if it isn't weather, and this may relate to the speed issue, even if it isn't weather, there's still boat wakes that cause the steamboat landing facility to be basically in a constant chop. It's a 1 foot chop pretty much all the time, just from wakes of boats coming and going. And that's not related to, that doesn't indicate that they're exceeding the permitted speed. If you take any one of the yawl boats off of one of the windjammers, you're going 5 knots, you're leaving as big a wake as pretty much any boat out there, just because of the way they're shaped. They're shaped like tugboats, and they leave big wakes. The launches are the same way. The Yacht Club launch and Wayfarers launches, they're not built for speed. And you know, even a boat that is built for speed, if you slow it down to 5 knots, it's towing a big wake. I mean, even a rigid bottom inflatable is towing a big wake at 5 knots.
Good point. Good point.
I'm following up on something Ron said. I think that I think all of our conversation today is conceptually, but I think that conceptually, kayaks in particular are not dinghies and shouldn't be thought of that way. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't have them, but we do have, not within our committee, but within the town, there is experience about kayak racks up at the lake. And my experience is, if you build it, they will fill it like in a heartbeat. Then the question becomes, so how much storage do you want to provide in light of the fact that the preceding 30 years, everyone took it off, as Ron said, they took it off the top of the car, they put it in, they took it home. But now, if I try to launch my rowing shell at Bog Bridge, first of all, I used to be able to just, before they tarred it, park there, take it off the top of the car and go. Now you've got all these logistics. So then I had to take the boat off, the rowing shell off, put it on the grass, drive my car away, come back, take the boat off the grass, put it in the water. Now they've got the kayak racks, and I'm not exaggerating, there's literally one teeny spot of dirt next to some trees that I can leave the rowing shell, park the car, come back, put it in, because the kayak racks have taken up all available space. So I think that when we have this real discussion that gets into details, I think that the kayak storage space, et cetera, is an entirely separate discussion, which I'm not saying I like or dislike. I just think that it has really nothing to do with dinghies that are in the water tied up to a float.
There are a lot of concepts and ideas here.
Can I just make one more brief comment, and it regards the aesthetic, that we are required to observe brightly colored kayaks in a space that was intended to be a natural environment, i.e. the park, either one of the parks. I mean, if we start thinking about storing kayaks in front of the library park, I'm going to really drag my feet on that one. It's bad enough that we're losing sight of the park because of the big boats that were being brought in there, but to impose brightly colored kayaks on what should be an aesthetically natural appearance is I think that's overstepping what's appropriate.
Ron, I'm just as a traditionalist as you are, but I think part of the concept here is for public use of the waterfront. And we really shouldn't lose sight of that. You know, people that live here, I mean, they live here because they want to use the harbor, and I think that's an important concept for us to focus on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. I'm talking about the visual impact.
Well,
That's not out of our reach to control. That's my point. And the point is, too, that if we continue to put the emphasis on financial return, and I'm not sure where that impetus originates. Where does that come from? That we are somehow rather obligated to maximize the financial return on the harbor. and
That's just a
compromise.
capitalist philosophy, Ron, but I
Okay.
agree with you. I mean, we
Okay.
need to,
Okay, Mark, let's carry that capitalist concept to the end, which is that if we don't protect our brand, we will sacrifice economic revenue in the long run.
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with you, Ron. And, you know,
That's a capitalist concept there.
I've
That's a
said
capitalist
that
concept.
the harbor is not all about dollars. It's about community use. And that's another thing we need to stay focused on and
I
not.
agree.
It appears to me that at this point in time, the emphasis is on the immediate financial return. And I think that that is the wrong path to take. We need to protect the aesthetic of the community and of the harbor in order to guarantee future economic return. That is a capitalist concept. Invest in the future, protect your brand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ron. Okay, there's our discussion on dinghies. Ready to move on to transient dockage. Any ideas we want to explore there, or how we feel about that?
Well, I'm not sure what the context that we're discussing it in. It sort of fits in with the conversation you guys were just having, because there's a part of me that says, if 3 people come in with a 120-foot boat and take up all that space, I don't care how much they're paying. They're sort of hogging the resource. But are we talking about at some point having an regulation or ordinance that puts more meat on the bones of how much transient docking space are we allowing? What are we talking about, the big boats from Tulsa? Or are we talking about something else when we say transient docking?
Yeah, I think the issue there was the size of the boats. And Ron's concern with the aesthetics.
Well, I would have all those same concerns, but I'm not sure what context, whether we're talking about having something that, is it an ordinance that the select board, sorry, I keep using that phrase, select board wants to formalize, or exactly what are we doing? Because I don't think we can have a beauty in the eye of the beholder, or beauty in the eye of Steve's eyes beholder of what we should have there. If we want to limit who comes in, then we'd have to go through a formal process of having public input and ordinance and all of that.
I'm not sure we need to go through, it's an interesting thing to observe, because up until recently, this has only just recently become an issue. So it's apparently a policy change as opposed to an ordinance. The policy appears to be that we, again, are trying to maximize financial return and sacrifice the aesthetic. And there again, the brand. The people come to Camden, obviously this year, they didn't get to see the Windjammers because they stayed covered, and that's unfortunate. But if they've driven here to see what we advertise as a Windjammer capital of the world, or whatever you want to call it, they expect an aesthetic, and we're not giving that.
So Ron, excuse me for just a minute, and Bob, just to address your point, let me read what we're referring to from Audra's letter here. I have been approached by the Harbor Committee members about the town adopting standards for the size and type of boats the towns allow transient dockage. Does the Harbor Committee want to provide policy guidance on allowing, disallowing certain types, size of boat dockage and/or incentivize certain boats, i.e. historic wooden boats?
One entry-level question to ask Steve Pixley. What does he think currently guides him in accepting or rejecting people who want to come in and tie up?
The only thing that would incentivize me to deny someone is if we don't have room. If, you know, we have a calendar, we have a dock plan, and folks call up and say, hey, we'd love to stay at your town. And I would say, what's the size of your boat? And you know, what's your draft and beam? And they tell me, and what are the dates that you want? And if we have it, and if we can fit them, we do. We accommodate vessels that want to come in and stay at our dock. Now, that's what it was when I took over 20 years ago. Jim French did not, obviously, you know, the floats didn't change. I've made them a little bit more stout. Now, instead of chains, we have pilings holding them on. So I did add power. We didn't have power when I took over, electric power. So, but no, there's nothing that I mean, obviously, if it's over 125 feet, then I'll say, you know, are you a massive, I don't want anything over 125 feet if it's like 4 stories high. I don't want that kind of, I guess, stress on the dock. If it starts to blow a lot of wind, that's too much for the dock. So our infrastructure will pretty much a guideline to a certain extent, but
So
no, I don't.
how often do you tell people there's no room at the inn?
Well, you know, August 1st, last week of July, and the first 3 weeks of August are basically those are the 4 weeks that you know, usually between the yacht club and Lyman Morris and us, that's the pardon my French, that's the shit show. I mean, there's just not enough room. Everyone wants to come to Camden. They want to enjoy the Mecca of Mid-Coast Maine, as Camden's been called. They want to come in. They want to enjoy, yeah, our harbor. So, you know, after that, like right now, it's crickets. And before a certain date, it's crickets. There's only a certain time where you know you're gonna, you know, be able to fill that. Now, I was one that wanted to put this on the agenda for you guys because I'd like to know if it's one person or if it's 100 people that share this view, because I want to manage this dock system and this asset, not just to its potential, but to what we want it to be managed to. So I'd like to clear this up and find out where we stand on this.
So I share some of maybe Ron's aesthetic concerns, but I think there's 2 questions from what you just laid out, or 2 things that we should discuss. One is, we've got that busy season of 4 or 5 weeks, and do we want to set a priority that one boat shouldn't be able to come in and take it all when you could have 3 or 4 boats there enjoying the inner harbor? And then the second question is there, even aside from, you know, people being denied space because a big guy has taken the whole thing, is there Ron's point of, well, even if it was empty, we don't want a 124-foot 3-story yacht there? And I think those are 2 quite distinct, different questions, because I definitely think that there might be some aesthetic in having 3 smaller boats in there. It doesn't block the harbor. They might look a little different, but they might also not be things of beauty. But I think that at that point, there's a use thing where you could have 3 different groups of users able to come into the inner harbor versus just having one tank take over the whole thing and sit there. So if we're going to have a discussion, I think there might be, are there different rules at different seasons so that, you know, July 20 to September 1, there's one set of rules and a different set of rules the other time. But I do think we should have a conversation about how to deal with the limited resource and what the look of the town we want in the Inner Harbor.
Yeah, it's a very interesting conversation because, and Josh, I see your hand up, I'll let you go, but I just wanted to say that I actually agree to some extent with Ron's, with what his basically, with the merits of what he's saying. There's part of me that agrees that if you could make it so that back dock, instead of having one 130-foot, you know, massive looking tank, as you call it, if you had three beautiful, you know, 45-foot hair shafts there, boy, I'd choose the hair shafts any day. We're not really getting those. Hair shafts aren't calling up saying, can we all come together and use that dock? So are we going to shoot ourselves in the foot? Because I also want to know, are there people that are going to come to me and say, oh, I heard that you're not allowing, you know, big boats. That's too bad because we'd love to come and at night and look at the beautiful lights of the big boat and stuff like that. So, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. And that's why it's an interesting conversation. Josh, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I share both Ron's concern and Bob's feelings on this, in that it is about managing this resource. I think one of the questions I had for you, Steve, what is the resource? Okay, the website says that we've got 2 spaces for vessels over 100 feet. So I was trying to wonder where that was. And then what is the actual length of the back dock? We say 120 feet on the website. Is that number? I feel like we need to actually start getting to, you know, what is the actual resource, and then how do we manage it? Whether it's you know, if it's 120 feet long and we take 20 feet of it for a dinghy dock, does that leave 100 feet for a vessel? You know, I guess it is about keeping this open to as many as possible, but also recognizing, like you just said, that you know, what's the demand? The demand is from the larger boats. So we need to sort of look at that and say, how large?
I just make an observation that if you're going to advertise a space that of 120 feet at the town dock, and like I have the same question, where's the second one? You've basically created the demand. If you don't advertise that, they're not gonna call and reserve space. If you say we have room for 2 65-foot boats, you're going to get calls from people who own 65-foot boats or less. But if you advertise that you have a space for a 120-foot boat, you're going to get calls for people that have 120-foot boats. So it is a policy change.
Well,
Introduced a policy here.
that's a good point. I mean, would it be as simple as just remarketing that and limit it? Our maximum dockage is 80 feet, say? So,
Or 65.
or 65, you know what, whatever number we want to pick, but
We limit all the other spaces. There isn't, that I know of, the space managed by the town that doesn't have some form of a length limit on it. And the only reason this has a length limit on it is because that's as long as the dock is. You can't get a 140-foot boat in there without overlapping the sterns of the green boats.
so I would suggest maybe changing our marketing program and limiting those slips to, you know, let's pick a number, let's say 75 feet, maximum length is 75 feet.
Let's limit it to length that would allow for 2 boats to occupy that space rather than 2 equal-sized boats. Yes, you could have a 70-footer in there, a 75-footer, and then maybe squeeze in a 30-footer behind it. How about we limit it so that you could have, if there's room, put 2 65-foot boats there? It's going to decrease their beam, which is going to be a help to the fishermen. And the fishermen, I know, because I've been told by one, that it's an issue getting in and out of their space when those big wide boats are there. They're concerned about scratching them.
Oh, it gets tight in there, yeah.
They've got to swing in their hauler in order to make sure they don't scratch the thing on the way by. And that's an imposition on the fishermen. So you're limiting access for the fishermen. I think in just about, no matter how you look at it, we're headed down the wrong path here.
Hmm.
Steve, do you
Oh,
have
yeah.
any information about, how many boats, how many nights were occupied by boats of this length, this length, this length? You know, I'm talking in complete ignorance about who wants to go in there. And I think maybe Ron's 65 feet probably does it, if you can put two 65s in there. But do we know what the customer pool really is to come in and tie up there, as opposed to calling Wayfarer and asking for a mooring in the outer harbor?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Who is it that's actually calling you up and reserving space to tie up at those floats? What kind of boats? How long are they? Do 30-foot boats come in and want to spend the night there, or do they want to stay out on a mooring type thing?
Yeah, I can give you a basic idea of that, Bob. Usually under 30, we get very few. Those are the people that want to protect the green stuff in their wallet. So they're going to go out on an anchor, or they're going to take something cheaper. So usually it's 42 feet or more.
Yeah.
That's usually the style. Now, again, if you guys wanted to rethink what that dock system should be for, then by all means, let's think it out and see if it's going to be a better fit for the community. The idea of making it so you can't take anything over 65 feet is something that is maybe merits the conversation. Is that going to change the type of boat? Again, well, I would love it if on a personal note, I'm sure there's folks that like the fact that the dock system brings in, close to $90,000. But again, it's not about the money, really. It's about the asset and about what we're trying to accomplish. So, that's why I said it'd be great if we could somehow get it out that traditionally built wooden vessels get half price dockage. Let's try to get them up here.
I'd like to just extend my capitalist perspective a little further and just point out that the revenue that's received at the town dock for dockage is not the only revenue that's brought into the town by the harbor.
No, not at all.
In fact, it's a tiny fraction of the total amount of revenue that's brought into the harbor because of the number of people who choose to visit Camden during their vacation, because they've heard about how picturesque it is and like to come see the schooners. It's the only place, maybe other than Mystic Seaport or some other museum, where there is an active fleet of sailing vessels. It's entirely unique to Camden.
And that's where I agree with Ron. I agree with Ron, and I've always agreed that it would be great if we could get more traditional boats to take those spots instead of the ugly tanks.
Steve, on the other side of the dock, what are those slips limited to? The 42 feet or?
Well, yeah, no, it depends how creative you want to get. You can put a 50-footer inside one of those holes, and that Grand Banks that was there for about 4 weeks, which again was as far as the stink pots go, it was a pretty boat. Yeah, that fit fine in there.
Well,
the beam
42.
No, that was a 30. I think it was a 50-foot Grand Banks.
50.
And on the long dock, the one in front of my office, you can get up to, it depends. If I do take up that dock, then I have to leave another 40-foot dock completely open for, boat traffic. for load and unload. It's kind of a game where you play, you know, I can't make it so there's no place to go, because then it doesn't work. You have to make it so there's a spot always open, at least 40 feet for folks to come and go.
So can we leave this discussion with a thought that we would like to limit town dockage to a maximum of 65 feet? And let's think on that and listen to public comment and.
Yeah,
And
that's a good idea.
That we answer the question that, yes, the board, you know, however the town manager's letter put it, that yes, we do want to discuss that. And I do think superficially that 65 feet somehow makes sense, but I think that we ought to just have more information about it, and that we might also consider having sort of in season and out of season, because there's a part of me that thinks if there's no extra demand in late June or in later September for those floats, and someone comes in and says, I'd like to spend a couple of nights there, and you know, with the longer boat, then maybe, well, we do get a little money, and we're not establishing that we're always walled off. And we're not keeping smaller boats from using it. So I just think there ought to be a bigger conversation about it, and that we should answer the question that was asked, that yes, the committee is interested in these issues.
I think that's a good suggestion. I'd like to just interject one more thing. That is that with my experience working on yachts, the bigger boats make a plan. They've got an itinerary. Well, the owner says, I'd like to go to Maine this summer. The captain gets on the ball. He tries to pin down the dates and then makes reservations in various harbors so that they will have a place to be when they get there. So you're hearing from that management style as opposed to smaller boats that are more ad hoc agenda or itinerary, where weather is a bigger factor for the smaller boats, and they end up showing up in Camden, and now they'll just spur of the moment looking for dock space. I think it's more important that we provide dock space to more people, if possible, and not let it be occupied by single. And
so Steve, do you have any reservations for larger boats for next year?
No.
No. So should we recommend that at this point, we not take any reservations for boats over 65 feet until we resolve this issue?
I would say that you could do that. I, as harbor master, have to, and I've just thought about that. Now, I'm more than willing to do that. I'm more than willing just to say, just on a hunch, but I want to make sure that your ability to talk and have these ideas reflects the rest of the people that I work for. I want to make sure that I don't, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I'm suggesting that we ease into this. And I'm just saying, you don't take the reservations right now.
Yeah. And like Bob was saying, you know, it's definitely okay to make it so once in a blue moon there's one there, you know. But I would like to see less of the bigger boats taken up. And like Ron was saying, the reason that they get it is because they do have this itinerary well ahead, and they do say, oh, these are the dates I want this, you know. Oh, they're not available, then I want these 2 dates. You know, they really work it. And so that's why we're finding the bigger that one dock is, you know, always has a big boat on it, because they take them up and they get their reservations in first, and you know, we respect that. So yeah, I could start.
You've established this usage either intentionally or unintentionally by policy.
And again, not to impugn your choice of words, Ron, but don't say that I did this. was my position when I took over. This was this was what the old harbor master did, and I just took it over and just kind of went with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's difficult, Ron. I mean, if somebody calls up and makes a reservation, I mean, you just don't say no. You say, well, let me figure out how to fit you in. And it's not, I mean, it's a,
My point regarding the website, Mark, that was that was a policy decision.
well, it was,
Okay,
but my point is, I mean, this is not new and this is not unique to Camden Harbor. Boats have become bigger. There have become more mega yachts, and there's certainly more mega yachts in Maine this year than there ever were. So it's,
that's got an entirely unrelated. The reason for that is entirely unrelated to any decisions we make regarding policy here. That was because they chose to stay in the United States rather than risk not being able to get into Morocco. That's why they were here this year.
yeah, okay,
They opted not to go to the Med.
right. So anyways, are we all on track there? Or we know where we're headed? So for the agenda, next month will be further discussion on whether to limit the length of the boats on town docks to 65 feet. That way it can be discussed with the public, you get input, and we will just have a further understanding of how the community feels. Okay, next item. Speeding in the harbor. Steve, I was forwarded a document from Sandy Welty about speeding, and I'll just forward that to you so that you want, I mean, it's just a clarification on how laws read and regulations.
Good, good.
Other than that, I think we had discussed signage.
Yeah, more. I want to get 2 more gym buoys, bigger ones. I'm going to put 2
Yeah,
more in for next summer.
yeah, I think the buoys would be appropriate. I don't think big billboards or excessive signage is really appropriate for the harbor. What do you, Josh?
Well, one thing that Steve brought up last meeting was that all of the day sailors he felt were exceeding the speed limits, if it were. And I feel like if we have vessels that are under the town's control and or review, that is a perfect way for us to lead by example. So Steve should be talking to those. He's going to be doing an annual review, and it could come up then, but it could also come up during the summer and say, listen, you guys are coming and going every 2 hours, and you're kind of setting the example. If you're, I know that you're there, I know firsthand that they're running on a tight schedule, and sometimes they get behind the curve because they didn't time it quite right. But the fact is, that's a group that we can say, we need you guys to lead by example out here. Slow it down, stay within the rules. And that's just one group. If we have other groups, whether it's fishermen, another group that we have some authority over, I think anything like that, that's really on Steve and us as a town to say, okay, guys, set the example for any others. And I hope that would bring things down.
That's a very good point, Josh. And I think lead by example overall, I mean, I've been out there. I mean, the boats, they're on their route, and they do the same thing hour after hour. And they don't really have much empathy for weekend boaters or people that may not understand the rules of the road precisely. And, you know, some of the comments you hear on the radio are just not appropriate. And we ought to talk to them about that also.
Now you make me want to listen to the radio.
All
A
right.
little salty sea talk,
What was that, Bob?
a little salty sea talk, or critiquing other people.
Yeah, it's, you know, a little bit of critiquing of,
It's usually a little venting. You hear someone that's kind of waited
Yeah.
long enough and then they just blurt it out and they don't
Yeah.
they just let it go, and it's usually not friendly.
no, and that's not, it doesn't say welcome to Camden Harbor very well.
So just so we know what we're discussing here, what is our primary concern regarding speed? Is it a safety issue, or is it wakes? Or, I'm sure it's going to be all of the above. But
It's all of the above. It's just people like venting.
Yeah, I would think that, you know, usually inside the inner harbor and the concentric circles that, you know, once you leave the inner harbor, you know, that's an area that you have to have order. If you see people that are going too fast, then it does become a safety issue. So, and also respect, you know, if someone's doing something in the inner harbor, they expect it to be serene and safe and quiet, and someone comes barging in there, and then all of a sudden there's a big wake and everyone starts doing it. Now you're in the Wild West. It's a big mad shit. It's a madhouse. I feel that this summer more than ever, it's just been like harder and harder for, you know, just more and more people. They just keep going up to people saying, "Hey, could you please slow it down? You're going too fast." Nothing's changed. It just seems like there's more of it.
And the definition of vessel speed is defined in the ordinance on page 15 there, section 7, pretty specifically. So, you know, if anybody has a question about, well, I'm not going too fast, well, but you are making a wake, so you are disturbing others, etc. You know, it's pretty clear.
Very.
I am going to try. I need to be unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you. Yep.
Oh, okay, great. So I would love it if there was some signage along the Lyman Moore docks, at the entrance of the harbor, at the harbor master's docks there, to encourage people to monitor channel 16. I can't tell you how many times I've given security calls, and I give them just to cover my own butt, to say that, I mean, I think I was probably one of the first people to actually start doing security calls with the boats, with the schooners at least, leaving the harbor, because just too many people would just come rumbling through the harbor with absolutely not a clue in the world. And I know, you know, it's a vain attempt to try and just cover my own butt to say that I actually, you know, made a security call on 16 and 13. But if no one else is listening to 16, it is for naught. And I've just run into too many tight spaces with transient traffic moving about the harbor where, and that includes sea kayak tours, who I've had to talk to, and Yacht Club, Opties, you know, their sailing program, who I've talked to numerous times. Just trying to get people's attention is a real trouble spot for myself. And I know it seems to have become policy, or seems to become precedent, that most of the schooners backing out of their berths or departing with yawl boats and no brakes are now giving security calls. And it would just be nice if some kind of signage was in the channel, encouraging or asking or demanding that people monitor channel 16 while they transit the inner harbor.
That's Barry. Yeah, thanks. That's one of the reasons I was thinking about. Jimmy and I were talking about putting another inner harbor float in, and it being a place where it would be a town float, and I could have some serious, it'd be the first thing people would say. It would say, this is a working harbor, you must monitor 16. And then it would go on to tell you that Camden Yacht Club is on 68 and Lyman Morse is on 71, free pump outs, things of that sort. Make the signs just so it's readable, not big or anything, but informative. It's not going to light up or anything. Well, I guess at night. So
So you're gonna add a float just for the sake of putting a sign on it?
no, that would be that's how we would like frame it, but it would be a float that in calm weathers, in 80% of the weather, would be a very good spot, a usable spot to have local people use it for the night, or a visitor, a 40-foot boat that wanted to come in. So it would pay for itself.
Well, part of the risk to navigation that we're encountering here, and the reason we're giving security calls, is because the harbor channel and the approaches has already become restricted to a point where there isn't room for windjammers to pass windjammers. So further restricting access to the inner harbor is not going to help that situation. The channel itself has become narrower and narrower as more floats have been added. Moorings have been added. And so I think that should be addressed. That first green channel marker is out from the Wayfarer side considerably farther than it used to be. And there's a float, there's a mooring. It's providing a swinging space for a mooring in there. That mooring could be removed, and it's just one mooring. We could remove one mooring and open up that channel considerably, which would ease the congestion issue, which is what is requiring the security calls in the first place.
So, Steve, would a piling make more sense with a sign on it? Say, could we put a piling out at the entrance to the harbor, or?
I would say before that, you might want to go to a big type of gym buoy, something that's going to be floating. I don't think you want to put a piling, because pilings don't move when you hit them.
Right.
But yeah, no, the spot, and we can discuss where I'm talking about, where the confluence is of the two channels, east and west, come together. There's another spot for it in a harbor float that would not encroach the said east and west channels. But that's a different discussion, I think. I don't want to muddy the issue.
Steve, I had thought of, if I may, Steve, I had thought of a three-sided small float with signage anchored securely. Personally, I'd like to see it at the outer extent of the channel to the inner harbor.
Yeah,
So people are aware before they even get into the
that's what I'm thinking.
entry channel. Three-sided float, each sign being, say, 4 feet tall by 6 feet long, is something that if someone hit it, it would move. But it would, obviously there's a bunch of considerations, but perhaps if it were three-sided and marking the center of the entrance to the channel, that would be appropriate. I don't know.
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
to consider.
Yeah, I agree that it'd be nice if you could get everyone on the same page. Make sure that if you're going to be in Inner Harbor, it is a working harbor, and you need to be on channel 16 for safety reasons.
Okay. So, ready to move on? Discuss Harbor Park redevelopment. It's after 10 o'clock now, so we ought to probably pick up the pace here.
Who put that agenda item on, Mark?
Well, I did. I thought that's something we touched on at the last meeting that we wanted to discuss. I mean, we don't have to. I mean, if there's nothing that anybody has any ideas on.
I guess my only thought when I saw this on the agenda was I'd love to hear an update maybe from Jeremy, who I know isn't here, or someone else at the town level, letting us know kind of where they're at with the Harbor Park and the Montgomery Dam, I think it is, at the head of the harbor. I noticed that the river here at behind the mill is still low. They've opened up all the dams, I guess. And I guess I just kind of wanted an update because that does affect the harbor, sort of where that whole process is. Are the dams gonna close again and the river will come back to its normal levels, or where are we with that?
Yeah, I don't have those answers.
No, I was just thinking maybe at the next meeting or something, we could have an update from, if Jeremy joins us again, I think he would know.
Yeah. No, just invite Allison McKellar. She'd probably love to talk about that.
Mhm.
Mark, can you provide some context on what Harbor Park redevelopment means?
What that means? Well,
Yeah.
it's,
What is this? What's the scope here?
It's the new
Well,
hotel complex.
the concern is global warming and rising water and the park flooding and the docks flooding and I
Okay.
guess that's what we've been looking at. And my concern is that the town is trying to look at it as a large, complex problem. And what I would suggest is breaking it down where you've got the harbor park separate from the town landing, and the harbor park floods. But if you were just to like build that up, you've got put in another layer, another row of granite blocking and backfill it. That's going to protect it from flooding. And you know, it may not be a rebuild, but it's a stabilization of what's there.
Mark, Harbor Park is the area to the north of the river falls. And then the public landing is the parking area. Am I getting the names right?
Correct.
Okay.
I think part of what's driving this is there's been a lot of photographs taken when the tide does come up above the Harbor Park wall, and there's park benches there. Well, that makes it look like an extreme situation. It just, you've got, it's like a flooded living room. You have furniture in a flooded space. So it makes it seem truly dramatic. It's a matter of statistical research to find out how often that area is flooding as compared to how often it used to flood. And you know, I'm not arguing that we don't have an issue with rising water levels. And I think you've got a good point, Mark. It's not a huge project to just add another row of stone and backfill behind it. I mean, it's a couple $100,000, maybe $500,000 by the time we've paid an engineer to design it for us, but because we don't do things efficiently. But you know, it wouldn't be a big deal if it was being done by a private enterprise. So let's put it that way. But we also have another issue with that wall, and that is that it's being undermined by the erosion that's taken place on that beach.
Well, and that's my point. I think the flooding creates the erosion or helps with the erosion.
Well,
because you've got the water coming in behind and washing out.
in behind the stone.
Yes.
Yes, well, that's a matter of just putting stone in there that won't wash out rather than just inch minus. I mean, and perhaps some silk cloth in behind it. There's also the frost action that has had an effect over the years that's pushed that top row of stones out, caused them to overhang. But we've also got an erosion problem that was created by the amount of dredging and how far the dredging went up into the head of the harbor. We've got a situation where that has turned into a rocky shore as opposed to a sandy beach. don't do it anymore, but we used to be able to ground boats out on that beach and paint their bottoms. And you wouldn't think of grounding a boat in there now. And the reason for that is that all the fines have washed out of that beach. So there's been a big erosion impact taking place there because of wave action. And that's not a recent event. That's not a recent phenomenon. It's a result of having dredged so far up into the harbor that the fines had a place to wash into, a hole to wash into. So that's part of what's undermining that wall, the park wall.
Yeah.
Just
So-
to point that out.
Yeah.
So there, I
Is
guess.
that a response, Steve?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's exactly what's happening.
So I guess we move on to the final item, which is the harbor master report.
Okay, well, I can make this quick. The only thing I'd like to say is that the town vessel, the Welcome, finally is showing some of its age. And the other day I was helping Garth and set 3 new pieces of bottom chain for the head of the harbor that keep the schooners from moving in a southerly direction in a northerly blow. And while I was doing it, the manifold, the exhaust manifold, basically cracked off just where the water jacket leaves the engine. So we were able to keep running it, but boy, it was all blacky smoke. And so the pieces are ordered. Jim and I are going to put some extra hours and get that boat going. You know, that boat is definitely showing its age, but it still starts up every time. It's just little things like that we're dealing with. As far as the state-funded pump-out boat, we've been in contact with Pam Parker, who is the original person from the state that started the pump-out boat. We didn't want to upset the apple cart. Just so you know, refresh your memories, when they came to us 17 years ago, they said, would you want a state-funded pump-out boat? And we'll pay 50% of all costs. And if you pump out Rockport, we'll do a 90-10. So we agreed to that. And for many years, we pumped out Rockport. When Rockport also got a grant to have now a pump-out system at their docks, they very rarely call us, once in a while, but very rarely. And we're still getting the 90-10. So Jim wanted to get a whole brand new boat. Remember, that boat's 17 years old. I said, let's just get a new engine because we're having signs of problems with that engine, that Honda. And Pam Parker has agreed to both. She's want a new boat, I'll get you a new boat. If you want just a new engine and then have that boat for another 6 years, I said to Jim, the boat's fine. It works for us. So we're in the process of getting a new engine for that boat. So I just wanted to update you on that. We got a lot of use out of that boat because a lot of folks were living on board because of the pandemic. Next year, we're gonna probably take Jimmy's hours back a little bit, just a little bit, because he's getting pretty winded pretty quick these days. Still keep Jimmy on, kind of move him towards more of like just taking care of boats and infrastructure and things of that sort, kind of like a maintenance kind of guy, and still doing some duties on the water pump out. So yeah, that's it. Starting to get ready to the whole floats out.
Yes,
And-
just wondering what is the schedule for hauling the floats out this year? I see a lot more boats later in the year on the docks, which I think is a good thing because people are still using it. But I just wondered if we're making any changes there.
We talked about that, but because of the fact that the yacht club is asking for some help on storage, their docks, I'm not going to change that this year. It's the same thing as every year. The last day you can have your boat on the finger float, the small boat marina, is October 15th. And every year it'll be the 22nd, and I'll still have about 20% of the boats still on the dock. And I'll have to, when the crane's there that morning, even though I've made phone calls, I'll have to hit tow the same people, same usual suspects off the dock so I can haul the floats off. And then they'll say, I was supposed to have my boat up by the 15th. And it's been that way for the past 30 years.
So what's the date for Steamboat Landing?
Steamboat's a little different. I try to leave that in as long as I can, unless we have some inclement weather coming in. So, November 2, November 5, I try to keep it up as long as that. Again, sometimes if a big southerly's coming in a week, 8 days before I'll take them out, and I usually won't put them back in if it's that close. I'll put that on the Facebook page, social media to tell people, but that's usually how that works. Good. There
Yeah,
you go,
Steve,
Chairperson.
Steve, yeah, this week and last week, you made a comment about redoing the harbor in 2 to 3 years being in process. Well, can you elaborate on what that means?
Yeah, that might be wishful thinking on my part. However, I am trying to get Allison McKellar and Audra on board and invite them to the harbor. Twice now I've had them over for kind of impromptu meetings, showing them the state of where we are with the waterfront and the wharf. I don't need to tell you guys that wharf is, when I took over 19 years ago, I started a capital improvement plan, mostly because Roberta told me I had to. She said, if you're saving money, and then you need to tell us why. And so I said, okay. And so I went and I did a lot of research on what things are going to cost to rebuild. And I brought Proc in twice to give me a quote, what it was going to cost from the harbor master's shack, well, actually to the left of it where the ramp is, all the way to where Stuart Smith owns. That wharf area was X amount of money. And I said to the town on a document that every year I would hand it in come, when it came time to do the financials and talk about capital improvement. 2017 is when we have to rebuild this. That's my estimate. And I'm not sure if I was far off or not. Maybe 2018 rolled around and 2019 rolled around, and well, we don't want to redo this now because of the fact that now we've got a 5-town plan on oceanic survey and what the effects of rising tide are for coastal communities, which is fine. I mean, I'm waiting for that information to, I guess, trickle down so then we can make a decision on what exactly we want to do. But at the same time, I'm dealing with a wharf that is, every season I piece together with the backhoe and we rebuild, it's like putting lipstick on a pig, basically. And I really want to buckle down and almost do like a 1, 2, 3 kind of scenario. Like, here's how we can break this up. It's not that big of a project. Let's take a look at what needs to get done. Let's prioritize what we need to do, and let's get on it. So Elliot, I guess to answer your question is, in 2 years from now, I would like to have, engineers already, diagrams drawn and plans made up, and all we're looking for is maybe, a grant or something. I want to try to get pieces of this puzzle in place. So in 2 years from now, we're well on our way to at least a new boardwalk and a new wharf, because it's just starting to become both unsightly and unsafe. So,
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
yeah,
Good report, Steve. Thank you.
thanks, guys.
So let's adjourn the meeting.
Sounds good to me. Thank you.
Next meeting is November 10th, 8:30. See you then.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Gomes.